All right, we are back. Mad Science Meets Real Life, number two, and our favorite topic today, one of our favorite topics for Iñaki and myself is work, and we were just talking about how much work Iñaki was doing last week. So you want to fill the crew in, Iñaki?
Yeah, so I kind of forgot because it's been a couple of years without doing big volume blocks, and I was just telling you before we started recording that I did a couple of back-to-back plus 5,000 kilocalories or kilojoule days, and I mean, in my head, fueling properly for the first four, five, and then this week on like Tuesday, I had a long ride with some VO2 max intervals, and I was feeling like crap. And I'm like, what's going on? I got back home, and I'm like starting counting calories in my head, and I'm like, man, I think I need to go for like 1 liter of ice cream because I'm severely depleted. And I did that. I refueled much higher than what I was trying to actually get done in the past. And today I had a fantastic 4 hour bike ride at Ironman race pace and run off the bike, and I'll go still for a swim. So yeah, I think it's a good starter for today. The energy demands and also refueling for those energy demands, especially when they are back to back.
Yeah, I was feeling pretty good about my own week. I did probably 13 hours, 14 hours, and I looked at, I always look at what the calorie totals are, and I saw it was over 7,000, and I'm just kind of staying in shape. I'm not really training for anything at the moment, so I was pretty impressed with that. And then I pull up yours, and I see it was 20. Hang on, I got the numbers here. 27,610 calories for kilocalories for last week. So yeah, a little made me feel not quite so great about my 7,000, but it's all relative, I guess.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not only the work, it's how you do the work, right? Because there were also a couple of gym sessions that were pretty hardcore. And when you carry the fatigue also from the gym, especially when it's max power, which is the phase that we are doing right now, the 2 3 days after that max power phase, they are feeling quite horrible on top of the depletion that you are carrying. So yeah, we'll get into this for sure. But it's not only work, it's also how you do that work, the intensities, the duration, and how many of those you put back to back, right? Without like actual recover, like full recover to increase your glycogen, let's say, stores.
Yeah, that's a good segue because first up, as far as the topics around work goes, we've got the difference between work and work rate, and something that I heard Gordo say a long time ago, and it really stuck with me, is that if you want to be successful in endurance sports, you need to put work before work rate. So I thought that might be a good kind of launch point for us to chat about just what does that mean, and what does that look like in terms of an athlete's long-term development.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a great influence primarily from Gordo, especially for me, when he talks about building the capacity to actually do work and then actually introducing sustained work or work rate. And I think it's very important for us to differentiate those phases because I think sometimes when you are trying to chase metrics, we will talk probably about CTL, TSS, intensity factor. You kind of miss the point of you really need to build that capacity, and vast majority of that capacity has to be aerobic, the input and the output. And many confused. We talked about this in the last episode. The aerobic development, so the capacity for doing work, zone one, zone two, but everyone tries to migrate to zone two. And we've seen research after research and decades of experience tell us that it's zone one actually what moves the needle. Out of that, let's say 80-90% of aerobic load you should be doing, about 80% has to be zone one. So everyone again is focusing on the sustained work rate, the metrics, because it's very entertaining, and probably you will tell us more because you are the expert. But we are missing the point. We need to be able to do the work. And maybe you can tell us, Alan, for example, when it comes to Ironman, if you are training for an Ironman, or if you are training for life, what's a good capacity for work, how you need to think about work instead of talking about CTL, TSS, performance metrics, why we need to talk about energy and doing the work.
Yeah, I think that's a really good segue into thinking about it from a more sort of historical position and what what sort of work were our bodies built for over, many, many tens of thousands of years. And that's something that a guy that you're very familiar with, Herman Ponce, has done a lot of research on looking at these hunter-gatherer tribes of Tanzania and other places, and looking at just how much energy they expend over the course of a day just in their regular lives. And we're talking about massive amounts of energy expenditure per day just through living. These guys, they've got PALs, which is the physical activity level. It's basically a multiplier of your BMR. They've got PALs of 2.3 times their BMR per day. And to put that in perspective, in athlete terms, we're talking about an athlete who would be training sort of 4 to 5 hours a day, at a pretty good level, just to put out the same amount of energy as what these hunter gatherers are putting out just in the course of hunting and gathering, kind of living. So,
So just to understand this concept better regarding the PAL or PAL, you mean that we have the basal metabolic rate, which let's say it will be how much, like 2,500 kilocalories, and you will
yeah,
need to double basically, or double 2.3 times, so almost 2.5 times that basal metabolic rate to be able to hit that hunter gatherers level of activity based on their
right.
basal
So yeah,
metabolic rate, right?
if we say, if we kind of do a worked example of, say, a person with a BMR of 2000 kcal per day, that's just what they burn from being alive. 2000 times 2.3 would be 4600 kcal per day. So they would be expending in extra activity about 2600 kcal per day, and if they're pedaling a bike at 150 watts and they're getting about 500 per hour, so that's like 5 hours of pedaling a bike at 150 watts. It's a pretty massive amount of energy expenditure just through keeping alive, and I think we've sort of lost perspective of that. And because most of us are working office jobs, and we're not expending much beyond our basal metabolic rate, really. We're just kind of sitting here chatting on podcasts and the like, and yeah, so I think there's this huge gap that can definitely be filled by sports. And I think it's good to have that perspective of this is sort of how we normally used to live, not so long ago. And we expended a lot of energy, and we were healthier for it.
And I like to go into two different routes here, Alan, because I think one important part is how you scale that kilocalorie or energy or kilojoules ladder. Like, obviously, you want, let's say, to get to hunter gatherers, but like if you attempt to do this like out of the shelf, you will collapse, right? Because you need again to build that work capacity to eventually build work rate. But that will be one of the tangents that I would like you to touch upon. But also when it comes to, and maybe I will give you here my take, the social normative, you just mentioned, everyone is sitting, doing, like a lot of driving, a lot of seated meetings. Like, what's a good excuse, a social available excuse that we have? And this is the actual excuse I'm using. Like, for me, doing an Ironman at this point in my life where I've done more than 200 races doesn't mean anything, but it's just like a good a good social excuse not to give a lot of explanations on I'm training that much, because I'm training for an Ironman. So it allows me to move a lot, having this, something in the back end, because I'm not chasing performance. I'm actually just chasing moving a lot and spending a lot of kilojoules per day. So maybe we would like to go over these two routes, like the social excuse of like how to get to like plus for 5,000 kilocalories per day, but where we start and how we start.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of looking at it. I often say that we need some kind of excuse, which is exactly what you're talking about to move the amount that we should, because strangely we're looked at as weirdos now if we move that much. It's not the norm at all, and I think us weirdos have to kind of band together into this contingent of Ironman folk to kind of offset some of the abnormality of it all. So I think that's a really good point. And for
But let
me,
me interrupt you there with a something that happened to me last year. I was walking a lot, and just going back to the social component of it, because it's playing in the life of everyone. Um, all my close family and friends live around this area where I am in Poland, and I was walking a lot in regular working hours, basically because I was working while walking all the entire last year. And the father of my wife, couple of friends, like reach out to my wife, like, hey, we are very worried about Iñaki because he seems depressed. He's always in the forest walking by himself, and like all these like crazy stories about this, why this guy is walking, like what's his problem, right? Like we see him since like the day until like 6 7 hours every day moving and walking, and just wanted to touch a little bit upon that. And I needed to give a lot of explanations, and my wife knew, but like then to everyone else. And it's much easier now, like with I'm training for a race, and even I don't really care what's the output of the race. I really enjoy the process of training and moving a lot. But let's go back to you. I just wanted to like give the context of also this social pressure on just moving randomly, right? This weirdo style of thing.
that's true. It's crazy. I mean, I think Iron Man's probably about as good as we're going to get as far as a socially acceptable excuse, that people can somewhat relate to. It's a distance that's scary enough that people know that you have to train quite a lot just to complete one, in some kind of good state by the end of it. So I think that's definitely a good way. But as you say, even an Ironman, even doing an Ironman it's a progression, right? I think me at the moment on my 7,000 kcal weeks, I'm not at that level where an Ironman would really be appropriate for me at the moment. So I think it's important, even if we have Ironman, if you're starting it off the couch sort of as a level of activity, Ironman is a great sort of long-term goal and something to point the program towards, but you definitely have to build up to that, and I look at it as kind of 500 kcal steps, right? So if you're just getting up off the couch, setting a goal for yourself of doing 500 kcal of work per day in terms of activity, I think is a really good goal. And it's something that's achievable for most folks, at least in terms of the activity level. It'd be something like two 40-minute walks or two 45-minute walks in a day, and I think that's a challenging but sort of achievable level of output, and that would be your 500 kcal starting point, and then going up a level from that sort of to where I'm at now. Just as a health and fitness sort of person, 1,000 kcal per day, which is basically 2 hours of something per day, is what I do. I have a big day most weeks where I'll do like a 4 hour session, whether it's an easy bike or a hike. But most of my days are sort of 2 hour loading days where it's that zone one work that you're talking about, and just trying to average that over time. Then the next step up, that sort of 1,500 kcal per day, I think that's when you start to get into this. Okay, I could maybe complete an Ironman on that sort of level of training, and that's a solid level of output that I think it puts you in that next level where you can say that this dude's pretty fit. I think anyone who can just get around the course of an Ironman is pretty fit. So I think that's a good kind of progression for someone looking to gradually increase their energy expenditure over time.
That's great, Alan. And some of the, I mean, misconceptions and also issues that I face myself as an athlete and as a coach is when it comes to measuring that energy expenditure, right? Because it's either always overestimated or underestimated, depending what's the hardware. and what's the software we are using, and specifically what's the activity. Because when we go to cycling, it's quite straightforward. As long as we get that efficiency, the delta efficiency in the bike, we can get like pretty accurate numbers, I would say, and maybe you want to touch upon that. But when we go to swimming, when we go to strength training, when we go to walking and even running, it's where the things start to go a little bit sideways. So I would like to know your opinion. And I know you have some tables. We can talk about those tables, but I would also like to talk about what we got from Strava or Training Peaks or the algorithms from Garmin. How good or bad are those to guide those trends once you are starting? Because it's, as far as I understand, not so much about the precision, but it's about talking the right concepts. We are now talking about energy, which is the right concept to talk about work energy, kilojoules, kilocalories, not TSS, no CTL, no intensity factor. So we are starting with the right foot, the conversation. So maybe you want to go a little bit deeper on that, Alan.
Yeah, so there's been some good work. I mean, as you said, all of the wearables now pretty much have their algorithms that estimate your energy expenditure for various activities, and there's been some good studies that have sort of looked at how accurate these energy expenditures are when we compare them to lab values for the different activities. And there's a pretty broad range, sort of depending on the activity, but generally speaking, about 20 to 30% error is what you can expect. So if your watch tells you that you burn 500 calories, chances are pretty good that you actually burn somewhere between 400 and 600. And, depending on how you look at it, that's if you're using that as a measure of how much you should eat, then that could be problematic over time, because you could be overestimating or underestimating a little bit over time. But for our purposes, in terms of kind of tracking it as a measure of training load, it's still a fairly useful figure, and a lot of the a lot of the error that is present in those estimates comes down to the economy of the athlete. So, when we do a treadmill test, for instance, you get some runners that are just very efficient with the amount of pace that they get for a given O2 output. And you get some runners who are very inefficient, and it takes them a lot of oxygen to run at the same pace. So a lot of the error that we see within the algorithms comes from the fact that the algorithms just kind of have to pick a middle ground, and they have to pick sort of this mid level of efficiency to go with. But in practice, what it means is, because our own efficiency doesn't vary that much, we're either very efficient or not very efficient. We don't randomly kind of become more efficient day by day. Over time, if we're tracking our own numbers, they stay pretty steady. So I think a little bit too much is made of the error in the algorithms, just because of the fact that we want to track what's changing for us, right? We want to see if we're doing a 500 calorie day or a 1,000 calorie day. And it doesn't matter so much whether those are exactly correct, whether it's really 400, 800, or 500, 1,000. So I think that's important to note, sort of the source of the error. But yeah, definitely things that you want to make sure you're conscious of. A lot of this is based on heart rate data. So if you have crappy heart rate data, coming from your wrist, and you're out in the sun, and you got all of this light interference and stuff that's messing with your heart rate, then that's definitely going to have an effect. So, I always recommend for athletes to wear a heart rate strap and make sure that data is accurate, for starters. And another thing that you really want to make sure that you do is the settings in, for instance, Garmin Connect or whatever platform you're using. A lot of the calorie estimates are based on percentage of maximum heart rate. So if your maximum heart rate is off in those platforms, then it's going to mess with your calories as well. So, that's often what I see with an athlete when their calorie estimates are consistently off. They haven't updated their settings, so they just have some sort of default setting in Training Peaks or Garmin, and it messes with it.
I think also because I had this opportunity of doing a lot of metabolic tests, something that you teach me, and we've discussed this for at least a decade. And when athletes come to me and they really want to, we are this kind of population when we are in the performance side of things that we really want to go to the ultra hyper details, which I believe it could be a little bit extreme. Like, I want to know exactly how much kilocalories I'm burning at 140 BPMs. Well, there is a chance to know that. You need to measure it in a metabolic card through a protocol that the steps are long enough, 5 to 10 minutes, not 1 minute or 3 minutes, which is the typical way to go normally in these labs. So there is a chance to get there and do it at least for the bike and at least for even walking and running, right? In the swim, I think it's a little bit more complex. And when it comes to strength, it's even a little bit more complex. But there would be a correlation, and this is what I've used for myself in the past, between what you see in your heart rates in the bike and in the run, and you can correlate that with some level of efficiencies changes to the other disciplines. So that would be a little bit more if you want to go down the rabbit hole and be a little bit more accurate, right?
Yeah, and that can definitely be useful. If you know your economy numbers, then that improves the accuracy a lot because then your economy isn't going to change very much over time. It takes a long time for your economy to change. So if you know that in reality, the algorithm's predicting you're going to be taking in 200 milliliters per kilogram of oxygen per kilometer, and you know that from your lab tests that you take in 180, then you can scale all of the other values by that, and you can get a much more accurate kind of calibration for the athlete. But yeah, I think in terms of kind of being directionally accurate, when we're tracking these long-term development of training load, that's the next level, and it's not something that's super important, I don't think, for calories to be useful as a measure of work, and as you said, that's what we should be measuring more than CTL and TSS and all those numbers. We should be looking at work.
And now, Alan, I would like to shift gears because we started right into work because it's the way to go, but we kind of skip what everyone else is talking about, which is like, where is your CTL? How is your TSS? Let me know about your intensity factor. Like, why we don't talk a little bit from the scientific approach and the practical approach about this advanced metric style of things and the actual difference with the advanced development of an athlete, right? And how that translates with practical examples on the math, on the actual numbers, like a 3 hour easy ride versus a 1.5 hard ride, and they have the same TSS, right? But the effects are different. So why we don't talk a little bit about this, Alan?
So yeah, I mean, I think you're a good example of this. So if we think back to when you were training the absolute hardest in your athletic development, and by hardest I mean the highest intensity that you were doing, and we compare your performance then to when you were doing just the most work at a comparatively low intensity, which performance was better for you?
I mean, for me, it was always the volume at low intensity
Yeah.
because I could recover much better. The distortion in my cortisol, in my sleep, in my level of hunger, also to manage my weight, like there was so much correlation to the intensity. I mean, and maybe you want to touch upon that. There is this kind of different athletes. One's much more like a workhorse, which I qualify for that one, and those that are more natural, let's say, reactive for the training, right? So you also need to factor in that when you individualize this for an athlete. But my case was definitely the extreme. That's why I believe that worked quite well for me. So I don't know how that would apply at general athlete population, but there is definitely a correlation between low intensity and less disturbance in your HRV hormones and so on, as long as you are eating properly, which is another discipline that you need to cover quite well. And I was really good. I'm still really good with eating, right?
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, kind of going to what extent is that globally true? In my last Substack, I did a little bit of a data dive, right? And I looked at what the sort of correlation coefficients were between intensity factor and VO2 max versus just pure work, pure kcal per week and VO2 max. And the pure work explained, I think it was 23% of the
Yeah,
variance.
it was something like 23, as far as I remember.
And the intensity factor explains 6% of the variance,
Yeah,
so less than a quarter, you know. So basically, on a group level, intensity just didn't matter. As long as the athletes were doing the work, it really didn't matter if they were doing it, you know, in zone two, in zone one, providing the work was getting done. But as you said, when you start doing it in zone two and zone three, your chance of doing the work starts to go down, right? Because
yeah.
of cortisol and just general kind of training stress. So you know, I think you hit the nail on the head there. It's all about work, and intensity comes into play in the sense that when you start to push the intensity up too much, the chance of you doing that work starts to go way down. And you know, I think that's something that a lot of athletes really struggle with getting, and part of the reason they struggle with getting it is kind of, I guess, a good lead into talking about some of those other metrics which encourage the athlete to do more and more intensity in their training, you know, like TSS and CTL and tracking those things. So might
Which
be a good segue.
I'll be honest with you, I kind of track the TSS and CTL and TSB, but I don't put as much attention in that as how much work I'm doing and how much. I mean, we periodize. It's a concept that I've discussed many times, and it's surprising for even some coaches and some athletes that we periodize with energy, not necessarily with TSS or CTL or we use them as part of the modeling process, but the real thing that we track, because it's input, process, output, it's energy, right? And it's kind of like the right currency to talk about, but there is nothing out there that will standardize this in the sense of as TSS does, because TSS, and just to get a little bit into the TSS that everyone is using when they have like training peaks or similar scores like in Strava, uh, it's a black box because you are basically just putting all together in a package and disregarding if it was eccentric load, if there was heat, how you felt in the session. And back to the example of 3 hours easy ride with same TSS at 1.5 hours hard ride with same TSS, the recovery process, the energy, meaning fat, carbohydrate used for the session, is completely different, but it's qualified in the model equally well. So if you give me the choice and I'm constrained in time because I don't have a lot of time, I will go for the 1.5 hours and it feels harder, so it should be better, right?
Yeah, exactly. And you know, that's a function of the model because the TSS is calculated by taking the intensity factor and squaring it, right? So every little bit of extra intensity that you do, you get a bunch more TSS. And you know, as you said, it's if we only have limited time, then it's very tempting to say, well, I'm gonna hammer it for this 60-minute session because I want to see that TSS as high as it can be. And we don't really give a lot of thought to you know, what is this doing to my recovery, and am I able to keep backing this up over the sort of periods of time that we need to see the improvements that we want to see as athletes, you know. So I think yeah, as you said, you know, TSS, it's fine to track, you know, and it's a good thing if we know kind of the composition of the training and that stays pretty constant. But if you're not keeping the composition of the training pretty constant and being, you know, having a lot of discipline with your intensity zones, then it becomes very tempting to keep getting pulled into that. Let's go harder and harder and harder in order to see that little blue line go up as high as possible.
I mean, as a matter of fact, I remember one of my highest TSS scores was above, I think, 200. And my performance at that time were quite horrible. right? So it's not only about the TSS. I always like to talk about numbers. Doesn't matter how much work you put, doesn't matter how much TSS you have. Race day it's different beast. So there is not a correlation, a direct correlation with race performance. And I'm always liking to be and be very honest with athletes about it. There is no guarantee about anything. That's why you should be focused not on the outcome but in the process. Something that Brad Stolberg and Steve Magnus constantly remind us in their talking, right? Just I think that's quite challenging sometimes, but it's the way to go when you are developing yourself as an athlete, even in business or with family. It's a long process. It's not only one race.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the good things about work, and it kind of goes along with what you're saying, is it's much more real in terms of being relatable to what you're going to do on race day because you have a particular task, you have a particular distance that you got to travel. You're at a certain body weight. It's going to take you X amount of energy to get around the course. So when you start thinking in those terms, I think you develop a much more realistic sense of where you are and what you've been able to do in the past, and when you start to develop the ability to back up these big, 2,000, 3,000 kcal training days, then it gives you a lot more information and a lot more confidence in your ability to do, a 7,000, 8,000 kcal day over the course of an Ironman. So I think it's much more real. It's a real number. It's something that you can relate directly to the course and getting around the course.
And it's something that sorry for giving so much examples around triathlon, but it's the thing that I know more, right? But we could do also with ultra running. But again, when we are in the specific preparations, for example, for a 70.3, but particularly for an Ironman, what we try to replicate, not necessarily in one day, but as part of the progression on those, let's say, 12 weeks before the Ironman, is precisely that all this like energy depletion, so you know how it's going to feel, and you can actually refuel, and you will never get to 100% of the reserves, but it would be like a typical simulation, those that you love to do, like Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, if it's the block in the weekend, and basically increase those kilocalories demands to mimic what you will actually feel on race day, right? So it's a progressive overload towards the race. Maybe you want to go a little bit more in detail on that, just to give an example, a numerical example on the progressive overload in kilocalories per day, because an Ironman roughly is 10 to 12,000 kilocalories, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's a good way of looking at it in terms of preparing for the Ironman. You know that it's a 10,000 kcal proposition, in order to just get around the course at any sort of effort if you're a relatively, large size sort of athlete. So that's the demand, and you can start off with, maybe you do 10,000 kcal over the course of 4 days in your week, and then you start to smush it together a little bit more, and then you do it over 3 days. And then maybe as a big effort, you do it over 2 days where you've got sort of, a swim long bike on one day and then a good long run the next day. So you start to develop this very specific work capacity for that is directly applicable to the race. So I think that's a really good way of looking at it, and you're prepared. You know that you can get around the course. You know that you've got the endurance for it, and then you can start to look at some of those more advanced things like improving the work rate and where you're going to distribute the energy in order to get around the course in the fastest possible time.
Which is, as far as I remember from my own experience, the best energy you can get for your bulk is in the run. So you need to be able to save the energy for the run. But that maybe it's for another podcast. Alan, but that would be for guys that are training for an Ironman, right? I like to call those big days, the metabolic days. What happens when someone like you right now, or like myself last year, want to do a big metabolic day? Why it's important to have at least one every 2, every 3 weeks? Where it comes the health and related benefits to have these big metabolic days, and also how you progress it, and how much is enough, because you need to have a cap, right? Because you are not doing anything, you are just living your life and getting fit.
Yeah, the way I like to look at sort of in terms of, we talked about the long-term development where you start at 500 kcal per day average, then you go to 1,000, then you go to 1,500. And, these are sort of, 6 month, maybe 12-month blocks where you're at each level of development. So that's one way of looking at it. And then within each of these levels, you got three different types of days, right? You got your standard loading day, which is just kind of your everyday training day. You've got your recovery days, which are, when you're a bit tired or your metrics are a little bit off, your HRV is a little bit off, you go to a recovery day. And then you've got what you're talking about here with these big days, these metabolic days. And the way I like to scale them is a big day is about double your loading day. So if you're currently an off the couch guy who's putting out 500 kcal of work each day, you're doing your 2 45-minute walks every day. A big day might be a 3 hour hike. So it's double that sort of energy output. Whereas a recovery day will be about half. So maybe you sleep in and you skip the morning walk if you're a bit tired and you just do the afternoon walk. That's how in my head I sort of have this weekly distribution of how the energy distribution should look.
And I think that's the safe way. And I will tell you why I ask you about this, because our tendency, and I put myself into that bucket, especially when you are highly motivated to change your lifestyle, is you kind of like go with those two first concepts that you mentioned, like the recovery and but then you have the weekend, and there is the weekend warrior word for a reason. It's like, okay, today I have 7 hours, but I've been putting like 90 minutes a day. I will go for a 6 hour hike. And that's where you go back to the beginning, because you get injured, you get demotivated, and it's like, oh, I'm not fit for this. I'm getting injured all the time. Why? Because the progressive overload also applies to exactly what you said. You need to double the work rate of your metabolic days, not triple, quadruple. And you need to be patient, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these are slow adaptations. These aren't overnight adaptations, and I think uh, because a lot of athletes see their short-term numbers improve quickly, they sort of become accustomed to that, and they sort of think that everything should improve at similar rates. And things like improving your fat oxidation, that can take a long time, and that's really what we're talking about here with improving this work capacity. So thinking in terms of years rather than weeks or months, I think is super important here. And as you said, the temptation's always there to, if I did a 3 hour hike last week, I'm going to do a 4 hour one next week, and then a 5 hour one. But really, these are multi-month steps in terms of increasing those levels. So I think it's really important to be patient. And when you're patient, you get those adaptations that we're seeking, and you naturally are able to do more work without it killing you, sort of thing.
Yeah, I think it's also human, because like where I am based in Katowice in Poland, in South Poland, there is an amazing community of endurance athletes, not only triathletes. But for me, it's quite frustrating because I've gone through what they've done or what they are going through, and is they train fast. They train fast all the time. And I know there is a cap of 2 to 3 years if you are very strong to really hit the wall, instead of training to do more work. So I think if you would ask me what's the key takeaway, is you really need to train to do more work, not train faster. The speed will eventually come. And I always tell this to people, and they can go to my Strava and look at it. It's like the zone one is fast, and then the zone two is faster, and then the three zone is faster. And as you progress and you are fitter and fitter, zone one can feel quite horrible. Some two can feel quite horrible as well when you are really metabolically fit, because at speeds that are quite fast. Goes for the running, goes for the bike. Like just imagine these ultra fast marathoners, I mean mountain marathoners, ultra runners. Do you think they are running like 30 hours in the mountain in zone 4? Like that's physically impossible. They are running basically in zone 1 super fast. How they achieve that? Through work, not through threshold sessions or VO2 max sessions. So
Yeah.
I really think that the part of the message, at least that I'm trying to give, is you really need to enjoy doing the work and be patient. If you want to do speed and get results, you will get them, but eventually you will go back to zero because the body can't sustain that without a proper base.
Yeah, I think when you talk about that, I think a lot about the progression of Christian Blumenfeld, and hearing Olive Alexander Boo talk about how when he first started working with him, he was already a fast athlete, right? They'd been through, many years in the developmental program of Norway, but he saw that the limiter at that point was just his work capacity because he he didn't have great fat oxidation at that point, and that was really sort of limiting how much volume, how much energy he could expend. And so that's sort of that fork in the road, that you're talking about, where you see these athletes like to train fast, but if I train fast, I'm sort of capped out at how much energy I can expend each week. Or I can take this other fork where I slow down and I get a bit frustrated for a while, but I gradually improve this ability to contribute energy from fat, which is essentially unlimited even in the leanest athlete, and it gradually boosts up that amount of work that the athlete can do. And in Christian's case, from that paper that you were referencing, on Twitter the other day, I think he got up to 5,000 kcal per day on average, above and beyond his basal metabolic rate. And I think a lot of folks underestimate just how much of a difference that makes when you start adding that up over time, and how much of a limiter energy is for athletes. If we look at a guy like Christian, I'm sure he's burning 10 kcal per minute from fat versus your typical amateur is burning 3 kcal per minute from fat. So it's like 3 times more contribution, and it's not coincidental that he's probably training 3 times as much as the amateur as well, because he can fuel that. He's got that sort of that energy in the tank.
But
So
Alan, not only that, also the fact that the same Christian, when was racing only Olympic distance, due to the nature of the training he was doing, he was limiting his fat oxidation. And as far as I remember, I don't know if him or his coach was discussing exactly this point when they were training for the Olympics, because it's very challenging to train for both of the systems where you require a super glycolytic capacity in one of them, and then you require a super fat adapted metabolism. And they kind of blended through training both, but it's quite challenging to address both at the same time in the same period of training, right? In the same, let's say, periodization model. Maybe we are maybe getting a little bit geeky on this, but I think it could be interesting to know a little bit more in detail this.
yeah, I mean, I think it again goes back to where we started. We sort of come full circle. You need to separate work and work rate training, and when you make the choice to go into a work rate phase, which we'd call specific preparation for a particular race, your work capacity is set. You're not improving your work capacity and your work rate at the same time. So that's that dilemma that always comes up for a lot of athletes, a lot of short course athletes, especially. You got a race coming up, so you got to do some specific prep work. But every time you do that, you're moving away from base and you're moving away from building this energy reserve that a guy like Christian has, where he can go out and put in 5,000 kcal per day. So I think that's a real important question that I wish athletes would ask themselves in their head more. do I really want to trade this base that I could be building for this specific preparation for a race where I might go 40-minute 10K instead of a 41-minute 10K? Is that really worth it? Is it worth that trade? And I think a lot of athletes aren't super conscious of that.
Okay, Alan, and in the implementation side of things, like if I want to choose a reachable energy expenditure target, where should I start? What, like I'm sitting here listening to these two guys, the Australian and the Mexican. So, okay, tell me, where should I start? What should I target?
Yeah, I think the best thing you can do is first of all be conscious of what you've been doing, and as you said, that's not something that a lot of athletes have been tracking to this point. So just going back and looking at what your average kcal, your average work expenditure has been over a pretty long period of time. Maybe you look at what you've done over the last 6 months and say, here's my average. That gives you a good starting point for, okay, I want to go a little bit above that. So, maybe you're a recreational level athlete and you see that you've averaged 700 kcal per day, over the last 6 months. And we want to increase that maybe by 10%, 20%, so 800, 850 kcal, and you kind of set that as your target average, moving forward. And when you set that target, you move from I care about, how fast I'm moving or what power output I'm putting out. You leave all of that behind and you just say, my mission is to hit 850 kcal per day. That's what I'm going to do. I don't care how long it takes me. I don't care what my power output is. I'm just going to nail this number day in, day out, and then over time, of course, you sort of ratchet that up as your energy, as your work capacity improves. But I think that's a really good way of approaching things. It's important to be realistic with where you are currently in order to set a good target for where you want to go.
That's amazing. And probably we'll leave for our next conversation, which comes from work, which is energy input, right? So how much should I eat? And which is a different beast. So I would not like to get too much into this time. I think that would be for the following conversation, because it's a quite interesting topic and everyone is interested in how to fuel, with what we should fuel, but fueling for the required work. That's an important part of it, right? Because I was just talking about this in our last camp, which was last week here in Poland. And the first things you see in a camp is after stacking 1 or 2 big days back to back, everyone starts bonking if they're like eating salads and trying to count calories, and like you've seen this like across the last 30 years probably. And I'm sure training so close to Gordo, you can remember like how the big meals, right? Or when we were doing the camps in Tucson, how much we could eat. It was insane. But
Yeah, it's a skill, and you've got that skill, and I think every elite, truly elite triathlete that I've worked with has that skill. They can swim fast, bike fast, and run fast, and they can eat a lot, and I think that's it's a really important skill to have. If you have that skill, if you're out there and you know that's something you can do, then you're probably going to make a pretty good ultra distance athlete, because it's super important. And I agree. I think it's something that we need to dive into in the next episode for sure.
for sure, because one of the most common mistakes, and just to finish this point with fueling, that I've seen with athletes is I haven't seen an athlete like at a really good level that it's overfueling. It's everyone is underfueling, and it's underfueling a lot. So they can't produce more work because they are not eating enough, and they're always scared. Oh, but and when they see me eating, and I'm saying me because I know this quite well, and they saw me last week eating, they're like, oh my god, this guy is like a beast. And because it's not the time when you are doing work capacity to watch for the salad and the chia, and like that's really important to eat healthy. But when you are in a phase, particularly a camp, which is high energy output and pure work capacity, you need to soak in absolutely everything or you will collapse. And the frustration and the energy just of moving to the camp, being there, you will minimize it. It doesn't make any sense. And it's not all the year. A camp, it's a camp. It's few days, few weeks, and that's it. It's 2, 3 weeks per year. So you need to really get the best out of it by fueling properly.
I've got to tell the story. So we were down in Tucson on a camp with Iñaki, a few other elite triathletes. Magali Tessere was there, and we did what we went up and down Mount Lemon 3 times that day, I think.
3 times, yeah.
Yeah. So we're doing like hill reps on Mount Lemon, and if anyone knows the climb, it's I mean it's a ridiculous climb. It takes me 3 hours or something just to do it once, but these guys were doing it much faster than that. So we go up and down Lemon 3 times, and then we stop in Uval Park, I think it's called,
Udall Park
to
to
do
do a run of the bike
to do
at
a
like
run.
8 p.m. or 9.
Right, it's like dark by this point, and I'm supporting, and I got to go and get gas for the truck. So I pull out and I start going to the gas station, and all of a sudden I hear this bang 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 on the side of the truck, and it's Mags, and she's like, "I need calories, I need calories." So that's what happens on these camps. You become limited by just pure calories. You just know when you've got to keep it coming in. It's all the time sort of thing. And then I think we ended up hitting ice cream after that. I think of that night, if I
No, the
remember.
cherry on the cake, I remember in Odal Park, for those that know it, you can smell all the fast food, like fat coming from like the McDonald's and Kentucky. And I'm like, oh man, like this is terrible. Like I haven't eaten real food since the morning and it's like already like 12 hours on the move. And I go to Alan when we finish and like, sorry man, but we need to proceed immediately to McDonald's or like one of those crappy places. And we just went there and it was like soda, ice cream, whatever we can get our hands on. And it was crazy. But that's just to give a little bit of a context. And it's once in a while. It's not the rule of thumb. I mean, it's not the rule. It's the exception.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean
Yeah.
that was a big day. Yeah, that was a
But definitely we will go in the next podcast or conversation around this area. Maybe we invite someone that is close to all this recently. I have a few ideas, but we'll discuss this with Alan to give you some really nice stuff. Now, Alan, for closing, before we close, because you will close this time, would you mind to put down in the comments after the podcast like a table of activities with the kilocalories so our guests can estimate a little bit better and match a little bit better their own consumption against what they see in the Garmin or like the generic algorithms that they are getting?
yeah. I love that. Great idea. Yeah,
Good.
definitely.
So now you close, mister.
Right. Yeah. So thanks everyone. If you made it to this point, we rambled a little bit longer this time, but I think it was good stuff, and I think it's probably the most important topic there is. So I don't mind going a little bit long on it. And it's something that I hope that as a group we can really swing the narrative on. And rather than getting people talking all about their TSS and how many watts they did for 2 minutes there on the last workout, we can start to talk a lot more about the amount of work that we're doing as athletes. I think that's what real athletes talk about, quite honestly. I've been around a lot of really good serious athletes for a very long period of time, and that's what it's all about. It's all about the work. So I would very much like to encourage everyone listening to start to shift to that paradigm, and that's something that I think we can hold each other accountable on. So I'm going to start sharing on Twitter with the hashtag work before work rate what I do each week in terms of kcal. And Iñaki, I'm sure, will do the same, and maybe we can get a nice little group together doing that, and throwing out some numbers, holding each other accountable to them. So I think that'd be a cool little project maybe have an impact and get people training in the right way and get them away from all of these intensity measures and into something that really makes a difference to their long-term development. So yeah, cool.
And I would like to say a phrase that Alan loves, just to close on my end. It's sine labori nihil, which is nothing comes without work. So something I learned from Alan. I had the patience, and I'm enjoying after decades of doing the work how good it feels. So I invite you to start now. It's never late.
Absolutely. And Iñaki knows what he's talking about. We looked at his long-term development the other day with kind of a nice yearly chart of how that work has increased over time, and it's a truly impressive thing to see. So it's something that everyone can do. You will amaze yourself if you're willing to slow down and just focus on the work. You'll amaze yourself with how much you can increase your work capacity over time. And Iñaki is the perfect example of that.
So thank you, Alan, for another amazing
Thank you, my friend.
conversation, and thank you all for listening. Tune in soon, because the next one is how you fuel for the required work.
Important one. It's you don't want to watch this one and then miss out on the next one, because you'll need them both.
Yes.
All right.
Arrivederci.
See ya.